Hello everyone, today is your lucky day because we're gonna share with you a top 7 most handy tips of starting a new project in 3ds Max. Starting with number 1 is setting the units correctly. You do it by going to Customize, Unit Setup, and then you make sure that here in Matrix and in the System Unit Setup you have the same units. We pick centimeters because that way you have less numbers and it's just easier to operate. And also make sure that in all of your projects you have the same units across your whole work. That's very handy. Tip number 2 is to actively use layers. If you don't have the layers menu yet, you can bring it out, and then you can bring out the layer explorer or the scene explorer. It is very handy to use layers. You can create them according to your needs. We already have the layers based on our work, which is interior design. Take your time to study and get used to the layer menu and the layer explorer. You can create new layers. You can rename them. You can also change and choose the color of the layer. You add new objects to the layer by selecting them and pressing this Add Selection to Current Layer. You can always delete the empty layers once you don't need them, or you can merge them with the existing ones. And then the layer that you selected last will keep the name and keep the color. The best thing about using layers is that it really helps you manage your scene and organize your objects. Once you have the layers in place and you have the objects on the right layers, you can just hide the objects once you don't need them, hide the whole layer content. You can also select all the objects on one layer by doing a double click in the Layer Explorer. Now you see that all the objects belonging to the certain layer are selected. And we highly recommend doing all the objects in one layer of the same color and all the objects on the other layers of a different same color. And that way your scene will look really nice and will be really easy to manage. The handy tip number 3 is to actively use only one viewport and use isolated selection. The thing is that when you do some changes in your active viewport, they have to be displayed in all the other 3 viewports. And in a complicated scene that would really slow down your computer. We encourage to use one viewport. You can enlarge one viewport by pressing Alt-W on your keyboard. And now you have everything full screen. It's just very easy to manage and read. Once you learn the right keyboard combination for navigating through the viewports, it will be very convenient to just use one big. Another handy thing to use is the isolated selection mode. You can enter the isolated selection mode by choosing your objects that you plan to edit and pressing Alt-Q on the keyboard. Now you have just the objects you need and they get your fullest attention. To exit the isolated selection mode, you just press the light bulb icon in the bottom part. The tip number 4, and the thing we really encourage you to do, is to name your objects. Really name them accordingly. Like, instead of having boxes and lines, name them as they are in the scene. And then it will be much easier to navigate through the scene and much easier to merge objects from the previous projects. For instance, then it's really convenient to merge objects between the projects, and you don't need to open the scene to check which box number 256 is your ventilation box. You just find it based on the name and you merge it in the scene. You can merge the whole kitchen or merge the whole ceiling structure, and it's really convenient. So when you're naming your objects, you're really saving your time in the future. The next tip is to actively use snaps, both for the objects and for the angle. So for moving objects, you can use this snap, and by pressing with the right mouse button you can launch the settings. Here you can pick to what all parts of the objects the other objects will be attracted to, and snapping, it's totally up to you. The important part is this thing that comes out if you hold the left mouse button, and that's in which dimensions the snaps would be working, in 2 dimensions, 2.5 or 3. Personally, we think that this 2.5 is the best, because then, for example, you can still create a spline based on your 3D objects, and it will remain a flat spline and not become a hot mess if you had it 3 dimensions. Ta-da! And about the angle snap, I think it's a very, very convenient tool. You can as well launch the settings with the clicking by right mouse button. And here you can see that the angle is set 5 degrees. Of course, you can set it 90 degrees as well. It's up to you, but I just find this 5 degrees is convenient enough. And then when you're rotating your objects with the snap on, you will rotate it on the step of 5 degrees. So you will easily rotate it 90 degrees as well. And then you would always know how your object is rotated in a way. Because if you have the snaps off, then you rotate it to something like 25.46, and it's really hard to make it sort of straight again. If you move the objects around, you group them, and at some point you need it straight, and well, you've lost it. So actively use snaps, and you can launch both of them by pressing A for the angle snap and S for the object snap. Tip number 6 is to learn by heart the hotkeys on your keyboard and keyboard combinations and use them a lot in your work. If you're planning to work a lot in 3ds Max, that's really going to be enhancing your experience, making it like a fascinating computer game. The most handy ones are, of course, the 4 letters on the top row of your keyboard is the Q for selecting objects, and then it's W for moving them around, E for rotation, and R for scaling. Then, of course, it's good to use a Z for zooming the whole content of the scene or for zooming in a selected object. Apart from that, there are many other handy keyboard combinations and hotkeys. You can see the full list of them in our blog, link in the description to the video. More importantly, you can even make your own keyboard combinations and assign them to the tools and the commands that are very needed in your particular working flow. For example, I have assigned a Ctrl-D combination for this window crossing that I can easily manage from a keyboard. How do I select objects? Like this or like this. And that you can do from customize and going to the customize user interface, and then you go to the keyboard here, you find something you want to assign a certain keyboard combination. Like in my case, that was window crossing. Let me see where it is. Yes, and so you put here, I already assigned, but you basically put it here and you press assign and you save your personalized, customized user interface. So the last but not least, tip number 7 is to save yourself a starting scene. For that, I would delete all the objects, leaving just one camera, the way we usually like to use it. In our case, that would be a Canon with about 28mm focal length. Locate the camera in an absolute 0 position, and so that each project will have objects in about the same area. Make sure that I have the layers the way I like them. Make sure that I have the snaps the way I like them. And save the scene as a start scene, and save and copy this scene to every new projects folder. So you will have the scene ready. Now you save those few seconds of setting things up, and you can just unleash your creativity to the project itself without anything delaying you. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you liked the video. Subscribe to the channel to get more tutorials, and please leave us your feedback in the comments below.